Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. You can find out everything there is to know about the VBC on our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org. On there, you can check out all of the upcoming Monday night Zoom programs that we do that invites veterans and non-veterans to come and listen to historians, authors, military experts. It's really a great program. It's going to have a lot of wonderful guests coming up throughout the year. You can also check out our blog and sign up to be a member. Also, you could send us your address if you don't receive our free quarterly VBC magazine filled with wonderful veteran stories. We hope that you'll join us on the website. As for today's episode of The Scuttlebutt, I invite Vietnam veteran Al Smith on to talk about the military and veterans group Braver Angels. Their mission is to bring together veterans whose military service has instilled them with the importance of unity, teamwork, and a country-first mentality in order to promote working together. Obviously, we live in a very divided country right now, and Al believes that the Braver Angels mission and the sort of core values that he learned in the military about working together can help bridge that divide. We talk a bit about Al's service and go into the Braver Angels mission and everything they have going on. You can check out their website if you scroll down to the description below, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. I know I did. Thank you for supporting the podcast and enjoy the show. Joining me today for the Scuttlebutt is Vietnam veteran Al Smith. Al, you're here to not only talk a bit about your service, but also Braver Angels, which I'm very excited to get into the organization and its mission. But I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Welcome to the Scuttlebutt.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I guess I will go, I don't know how far you want me to go back. I born and raised in the inner city of New York, ended up at the University of Connecticut. When I got out of the University of Connecticut in 1965, it was a time when everything was ramped up for Vietnam. They were drafting when I was there. I guess it turned out to be a lottery later on, but I was drafted. And then I went in as a private, and I went to Fort Dix, went to Fort Jackson for advanced infantry training. And so I guess somebody told me, you got a college degree, you should really be an officer. And I said, fine, I'd like to go to, how do I become an officer? They said, well, you missed West Point and you missed ROTC, but you can go to officer candidate school. I said, okay, sign me up. It's 6 months. Of course, what they didn't tell me is they were losing so many second lieutenants in Vietnam. They just needed them fast and furious. So I went to OCS, became a second lieutenant in the infantry, went to Fort Campbell, home of the 101st, and I was there as a training officer for those in basic training. But it wasn't long. It was probably about 6 months, and I got my orders for Vietnam. They sent me to Fort Lewis to be part of a troop ship of 2,500, 90 officers, 2,500 non-commissioned officers. But they sent me to Fort Lewis. They got the orders screwed up with the officers and sent the officers there 60 days before the rest of the troops. So we had 90 infantry officers, and they didn't know what to do with us. So they attached me to a engineering unit that went up to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and that unit built every year they built the Boy Scout Jamboree. They built all the tents. But since I didn't know how to put a nail into a board or a hammer, they gave me a Jeep and said, get lost. So I was there enjoying the scenery in Idaho. And then my time came and I went over on a troop ship to Vietnam.
What year was that finally? It seems like that was about almost 2 years later.
Let's see. I guess that was in 67.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of years.
Yeah, because I came home in November 68. So it was 67. When I got to Vietnam, I was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, and I went up to Phuoc Vinh, and I was there for, I guess, about 6 months. And then we did operations over the course of the next year in what they call as 3 Corps, which is from Saigon all the way up to the Cambodian border.
Yeah, I was gonna dive back just a touch and sort of ask, you come out of out of New York. So you get up to the University of Connecticut.
Yes.
The war is sort of near its beginning phases at that time. So you had to be kind of aware of what was going on, or did you kind of focus on studies and Vietnam was sort of this place that you'd never really thought of?
Good question, because I guess I went to UConn in 61.
Mhm.
I think JFK in 64 sent in what he called military advisors to Vietnam.
Mhm.
But the first entire unit, military unit, that was sent to Vietnam was 65, and that was the first air cav.
Mhm.
So when I started college, the Vietnam War was not heated up yet, so to speak. Uh, it only really came about in 65.
Mhm. When you got drafted, were what were your feelings at that time?
Well, I knew I was going to go. I mean, I'm out of college. I can't no college deferments. I was single. I was healthy. I had a pulse, and I I'm going to, if my country wants me to serve, I'm going to serve my country. I'm not going to go to Canada or whatever. And so
Mhm.
I went. It was too, I couldn't really debate the war, whether it was right or wrong. In a way, you didn't know. You went. Your country's asking you to leave and go to Vietnam.
And this was earlier than when the war started to get bad and the home front started to really have a lot of division about the war. Was there support in 65 to 67? Was it a little bit more on the home front? Like, there was more civilian support?
I guess it was kind of neutral as I didn't see any protests like when I was at Fort Campbell or I was at Fort Benning.
Mhm.
Um, there wasn't a lot of protests. I guess it was in 65 when they sent the first air cav over. And then the first major battle of the war was the Ai Drang Valley with the first air cav. And they had, I don't know, maybe 250 killed or what Americans killed. And then it started from what I understand on television, every night you would see these battles and you would see a body count, obviously of the VC or North Vietnamese, but you'd also have Americans coming home in body bags. Uh, so, that then the protests, I guess, started. And what really set it off was, of course, I was in Vietnam when Tet happened, which was,
Mhm.
I think, the end of January 1968.
Yeah.
And of course, that basically you had Walter Cronkite questioning the war. He never did before, but it was like, who's winning this war? They're attacking us. Something's wrong with this picture. And then when Walter Cronkite turned kind of against the war, then the protests really went crazy.
What was your experience like there when you finally landed? You're in 3 Corps. Was it still pretty kinetic where you were at?
Well, uh, when that whole experience being there for a year, it was, and I guess any Vietnam vet would tell you this. It wasn't an all out battle every day. I mean, you might get rocketed, or mortared at least. When we go out on search and destroy missions, you would go out and you'd make no contact, and you come back in, and the next day you go out from the base camp, and you go on another search and destroy mission, and no contact. And after maybe 2 or 3 weeks out, you'd come back to base camp for about a week. And then you go out to another landing zone in another area looking for the Viet Cong, or
Yeah.
hopefully not, but the North Vietnamese, because they were big units and better trained. But when all hell broke loose. But you could get lulled into, it wasn't World War II. You weren't on the front lines at Bastogne every day.
Right. Can you tell me about that first? I'm always interested in the first time you had to go outside the wire. The first, I mean, you had gone through basic, you'd gone through OCS, so you had men that you were in charge of. But that first time you had to go outside the wire, go on a search and destroy mission. Do you remember that first time?
I do. I do. And the one thing I would say in Vietnam, most of those going to Vietnam were not trained properly or had enough training.
Hmm.
Because I mean, we're going into jungle warfare, we're going into rice paddies, we're going into the highlands, whatever, and we were not trained, in that kind of. I guess special forces troops had a lot more training when they went over for special operations, but when I got there, I relied so much, and this is anybody new in country, so much on the troops that were there.
Hmm.
I mean, there was so many things that they did that I had never been told about. But like how to talk on a Prick 25, the phone, without even talking, just by breaking squelch to the person on the other end without ever making any noise. I mean, you were never told that or trained on that. So much of what you learned was OJT initially, and you relied on. I relied on my platoon sergeant,
Hmm.
and I relied on the troops that had been there for 3 months, 7 months, or whatever.
You said breaking squelch? I thought maybe the first time
Well,
I've heard that.
yeah, no, yeah, on the radio, um, when you click it on, it gives a little buzz, and that's when you talk.
Yeah.
And then when the other person clicks on, I believe if I remember this right, they talk. But if I had like in the middle of the night, we have listening posts around our uh, uh, our base camp, and that's two guys out there who, if the Viet Cong were moving to the perimeter, they would see it or hear it first, but they couldn't talk because they're out in the middle of nowhere. So what you would do is if they broke squelch, you knew something was going on. So you would talk to them and say, "Do you see movement?" And they break squelch once, and they break squelch once. Tell me if they are 100 meters away, break squelch twice. If they are more, break squelch. And so you were talking just by this radio, breaking squelch on, and you hear it click, 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 squelch. Amazing, amazing stuff.
Do you remember the first time that you were shot at?
Yeah, I guess, but it was more of from a distance, and it wasn't an all-out firefight. Thank God
Mhm.
I never got an all-out firefight, because when you got in that kind of situation, you were in bad stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I was mortared on numerous occasions. I was at Tet, which was kind of kind of crazy as I think back now. I was in base camp for Tet, and all of us, we were all in a hooch, a little tent, a camp, whatever. And I'll never forget, somebody had just come back from Hong Kong from R&R, and they had the Beatles Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden, and I was in Quan Loy. Quan Loy was the Michelin rubber plantation,
Yeah.
and that's where we were based. And all of a sudden, in came these, I never had rocketed before, these, whatever, 122, 140, whatever rockets comes screaming through the rubber trees and exploding. Well, of course, we dove for the bunker, but the craziness of war, and you look back at this, somebody had forgot to turn off the tape recording. So there'd be this loud explosion, and in the background, you'd hear Lucy in the sky with diamonds. And then another rocket would come in and hit a tree. Thank God you wanted to hit a tree, and it would explode. And you'd hear in the background, I get by with a little help from my friends. So at the time, you're scared to death. But as I
Yeah.
look back, it's one of these humorous situations in war that people run across.
Oh, so strange and oddly like beautiful in a weird kind of way. Like there, as long as no one is getting injured, like these
Yeah.
explosions happening with like sort of these lyrics happening. It's like it's almost like a movie, but obviously just like chaos, I'm sure.
Well, the night, Chet was at night, and the next morning, Quan Loy had little airstrip. where we'd run operations with the helicopters. They actually could fly in, I think, fixed wing. But then in the morning, I went up and I saw this helicopter that was, if you looked at it, you would just see a pile of ashes. And that was a Huey. That was a direct strike by one of these rockets. And once again, you got to have some humor, otherwise you'd go crazy. And I looked at it and I kept thinking, I think the taxpayers back home are not going to like to see this, because I mean, it was just nothing.
Right. Did you make close friends? Was it hard as an infantry platoon officer to make close friends, or did you kind of keep your distance?
I did make close friends. How do I say this? When you say close friends, you were a band of brothers. You really were. Your camaraderie was amazing, and the guys in my platoon, I liked them a lot. I got to know them. I got to know a little bit of their background. They got to know about me, but you weren't really thinking so much rank. I had a job as in charge of that platoon, but I wasn't there to yell at them and direct them left and right or whatever. They knew their job. I knew my job. So you were a group. Yes, I was in charge of that 15 guys, but when we were on a mission, yes, you had time to work with them, talk with them, socialize with them, so to speak. And I knew them all. I knew their background.
Did you stay in touch with them after the war?
The only one I stayed in touch with was a second lieutenant who was in my company, and he was from Jamaica, Long Island, and I used to live in Queens. I was still in the New York area. So when I came home first, he came home second. And then we got together and I went to his wedding, but that was the only person. Now, that said, I had a platoon sergeant who lived in Brooklyn. And of course, I was in New York City, Manhattan. And when I went home first, and he said, Lieutenant Smith, would you go see my mother and tell her I'm doing okay? And I said, Sergeant Marino, I will definitely do that. Well, sure enough, I got home. I try to find my way around Brooklyn, which is impossible. But I did get to the apartment complex, and I saw this kid, and I said, "Listen, I'm looking for Mrs. Marino." And this is almost like a scene from a Hollywood movie. She yells up, and she said, "Maria, Lieutenant Smith is here." And this lady pokes her head out of the window and said, "Send him up." And I'm going, "Oh my God, this is like the Goldbergs, the
Yeah.
TV show years ago."
Yeah.
So I did that. I also had a situation, I don't want to get too lengthy on this, but when I was in the field, I was an infantry platoon leader for 7 months. And then they brought me in as the executive officer. 2 weeks after I had been called into base camp, my platoon was ambushed, and a couple of guys were killed. It was a bizarre situation, if you can believe this.
Yeah.
So this one sergeant, Gary Gable, I waited about seven days. I said, I'm going to send Gary's parents a letter, because I'm the closest to him and they're on the other side of the world. And I think they would appreciate hearing from somebody who knew him well over there. And so I sent a letter and I said, Gary was one of the greatest guys I knew. He was a great, brave, courageous person I met in a platoon. I loved, I think I said something like, if everyone was in my platoon was like Gary, I'd have the best platoon in Vietnam, and I'll always miss him, whatever. About a week later, I was called in by the company commander and said, Lieutenant Smith, you have a congressional investigation against you. And I said, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
He says, no, we're not kidding you. Congress is looking into you. And I said, why? I've been here for 7 months. apparently my letter got to the house, and that's how the mother and father was informed by letter.
Oh.
And by then, that should never happen.
Mhm.
If you're killed in Vietnam, you're always told a chaplain or whatever your faith is, and somebody from the local ROTC, an officer, would go to your house so you could be consoled, and they would do it a formal way. Not with Gary. Gary's parents heard it through my letter. And of course, I was blown away. I was shocked. I said, I could give a shit less, pardon my French,
Yeah.
but what happened to me, but I'm thinking of these mother and father. Well, anyway, make a long story short, Gary's parents said, whatever when they came to investigate, they said, do not do anything against Lieutenant Smith. Matter of fact, we liked the letter so much, we hung it on top of over his casket, da 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 da. Okay. When I got home, I said to myself, I wonder if the mother and father would like to hear from me. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the memorial, and at the memorial, you can find each name and you can find out the hometown. I knew his hometown, yeah, but you could find out the newspaper, and the newspaper had the address and everything. Yeah. So I was able to get the phone number. I called them. They said, yes, we'd love for you to come out. I drove out. And I was a little bit leery because here, a mother and father who had lost their son, and they had to be mad. They had to hate the whole thing. They had to be against the country. Yeah. But when I got there, they had an American flag across the front of the house, and they had all the relatives there to meet me. And the only thing I could think of is, thank God in this country we have such patriotic families, mm-hmm, that this is getting them through a very difficult time, as opposed to them getting into a protest or whatever. So, in response to what you said is, did you ever stay in touch with anyone? That's one situation that I didn't stay in touch with Gary, but I did with his family. And then we sent, we always send each other Christmas cards every year.
Oh, that's nice. And I think this sort of line of thought and questions that I have are sort of leading towards this idea of what Braver Angels is about, and that's bringing people together and sharing in what the military has taught you about, supporting each other. And that's sort of the mission of Braver Angels, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I'd like to ask you, when you came home, what was your homecoming like?
Again, a little bit of humor, I guess. My last 4 months in the military was at the Boston Army base, because I wrote out my dream sheet. I guess anytime you're ready to be transferred, whatever, you can write out this dream sheet. Well, where would you like to go? So I thought it was a joke, and I said, I'm still feel college days are in me, and I like to do something with colleges, and I love New England because I'm from Connecticut, New York, whatever. I ended up the Officer Candidate School recruiting officer out of the Boston Army base. And my job was to go to a different college every day, set up a little table with a display, and basically those who did not go into ROTC, and they were seniors or juniors, whatever, when they came out, why not go to Officer Candidate School since you have a degree? So that's my job. Yeah. Well, the first college I went to was Assumption in Worcester, Mass. And I got my uniform, and I got to set up my little display, and in comes about 25 students. They all sit down in front of me, and they just stare at me. Well, they're protesting. And then one girl said, "You're a baby killer, aren't you?" So that's the division in our country. Here I am and have to put up with this, but that's how it was. And so that was my welcome home. And of course, back then they told you don't wear your uniform, yeah, if you came back, because there was such animosity towards the troops. the general public couldn't separate the war from the troops. If you were a troop, you were the war.
How did you respond to that? That was your first assignment. You go in, you set up, and then suddenly a protest is in front of you, and being called a baby killer. Like, how did you navigate that? Because you couldn't just pack up and leave, right?
No. No, as long as they were not violent, I was not going to be violent. And I think if I packed up and left, that would be a statement that, I was a coward. I wouldn't address them if they had questions. So I stayed. I just, and finally they left. Of course, you couldn't get angry. I wanted to get angry and say,
Yeah.
you SOBs, and what the hell do you know about the war? You did that, and you got 25 people trying to talk you down. No one's going to win. So I put up with it.
Tolerance and patience.
Yeah.
As we sort of dive into Braver Angels, and sort of their mission of healing divide and understanding where we are at sort of in our country now, and there's a large divide. It's very difficult to have togetherness and everybody working together. Did you feel that the division back at that time during Vietnam era was worse than it is today? Can you sort of compare the two?
I guess if I had to make that, back then, there was division on one side or the other about the war.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there was division like we see it today. Today, we see division in this country in so many different ways. You're divided by race. You're divided if you're a Republican or Democrat. If I was in Vietnam and I was talking to somebody in my platoon and they said, well, they're a conservative, and I said, well, I'm a liberal. Who cares? We talk about it, we can joke about it and whatever. Today, if I'm a conservative and you say you're a Democrat, immediately I label you as a bad person, and your opinion is stupid. And I really don't want to converse with you about it. Mm-hmm. So today we're in ideologically labeled. We're put into little silos: black, white, Muslim, Catholic, your belief, my belief. It wasn't that way in '67. It was, you're for the war, against the war. But other than that, we're all Americans.
So speak to me a bit about Braver Angels. What's the history? How long has the organization been around? And specifically more like, what's the mission?
Yeah, this all started after the 2016 presidential election. Mm-hmm. Trump versus Clinton. And there was so much animosity. There was so much finger pointing. There was so much almost hatred. And it spewed over to, who did you vote for? You voted for Trump? I know exactly the kind of person you are. You're against this, you're against that, you're a terrible person, nasty, you're whatever. You're for Clinton? How could you ever support that person? That's a bad person. That's undemocratic. So the founders were like three guys who had a big background. One was a marriage consultant trying to bring people together. One was a consultant with something else. And they said, this is not good for the country. I mean, we are really going in the wrong direction. So they put together a workshop in Ohio with 10 Trump supporters and 10 Clinton supporters. Mm-hmm. And they're so good and Braver is so good at doing this. And they asked one to talk about the other, and the other talk about that. Well, the bottom line, after going back and forth what each person was about and what in their background, you ended up with 20 people who are good friends. They liked each other.
Yeah.
And they realized the other side was not all bad. And that's the beginning of Braver Angels, doing these kind of skills workshops: how to listen, how to digest, how to process the other person, what they're thinking, as opposed to hearing they're this and therefore that's all wrong.
Were the three of those three gentlemen, were they veterans?
No, they were not.
So how did how did sort of the veteran idea sprout within Braver Angels?
Well, about 5 years ago, I got involved with Braver Angels, and because I think what they're doing is right. I mean, they're looking at depolarizing all these different things: the media, the institutions, the parties. What we got to reduce the polarization in this country, and along with that, we got to create a civil discourse. We got to create a movement of civility in society, because we're talking down to each other based upon where you're coming from, what your opinion is, whatever. So that's what Braver Angels is all about. So I became the co-chair of the Connecticut Alliance. They have Braver Angels alliances in every state. They're very well organized in the grassroots, which is why I like them. So you can get involved and see what you're doing is making a difference. And we put on workshops. We brought a Republican and Democrat together from the state house to show that people can get along in politics. And we've addressed abortion, CTR, you name it, bringing people together to show the other side is not all wrong. Okay. So that's where I was, and I did that for probably, well, I'm still doing it, but about a year ago, some veterans got together and said, listen, if you could take any group of people that and make them the perfect Braver Angels volunteer supporter, who would that be? And we all said veterans. Mm-hmm. Veterans are all about country first, unity, teamwork, listening to the other person. That is what Braver Angels is all about. So we said, why don't we form what we call an affinity group? We're all part of Braver Angels, but let's call it the military and veterans group, and we will get together as veterans, and we will try to recruit other veterans, because we have ins with VFWs, American Legions. We can go talk to people like that. We can bring other veterans in, because they will be such a strong group within Braver Angels. And that's how the military and veterans group started.
Sprouted within. Is it hard to keep an open mind? Now, you might be grassroots and sort of trying to bring people together, but as you yourself started to open up that door, listen to the other side, try to work together, how do you keep that open mind, keep that open door policy of like, I want your ideas and my ideas to mix and create something better?
Well, first of all, again, here comes the core values, what's instilled in any veteran. Mm-hmm. We are about bringing people together. We are about and we know that you can't fight with somebody who has a different opinion than you. If you're a veteran, you're together. Mission first, country first, whatever. But so that was instilled in me, like all veterans, I think it's instilled in. But above and beyond that, when I got involved with Braver Angels, I attended a lot of these skills workshops that they do. By the way, it's free. It's on Zoom. Anyone can go to it. And I started seeing some of the skills that people can use to have civil conversations, to listen first, to not just think about what my reply is, but more process where the other person is coming from.
So veterans are uniquely positioned to be able to start to adapt and overcome. That is really kind of what I go back to. And this idea of like, we have a problem, and that could be the division, or we also have a problem that we need to solve, and we need people to work together through that division to help solve the problem. And veterans, like I said, are uniquely sort of positioned to be able to lead us there.
Exactly. To me, it's like in our genes. As I said before, it's instilled in our core values. This is how you complete the mission. You don't complete it by fighting within. And I think veterans understand. maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but I think veterans as a group understand more than anything that a divided America is a weak America.
Hmm.
A divided, what Lincoln said, a house divided cannot stand. I think we understand that well. I think Americans understand polarization within the country is a threat to our democracy. So this is what we bring to the table in support of Braver Angels.
It feels very difficult now because I'm a young guy, I have a young family, and there's not only division between neighbors and political groups and religious groups and ethnic groups, but division within families, and that's really caused a lot of strife. And it's very difficult to break out of that mold once you're, I feel, conditioned at this point. We're almost conditioned over the last 20 years to pick a side, plant your flag, and that's the hill I'm going to die on. And, that other hill, like, they don't know what they're talking about. So it goes back to that idea of just like trying to listen. And when you guys have a workshop, is it a lot about educating each other or educating the whole group, trying to help them to see we're all a part of this country and we're all trying to make this country better, despite the fact that some people believe X and some people believe Y?
Yeah, the workshop is all about using certain skills to allow you to converse with the other side and understand the other side. Now, none of the workshops are set to try to convince the other side, you gotta think the way I think. You can go to a workshop and come out and say, my opinions are still the same. I still believe what I believe on this issue, but I realize the other side. I know what their viewpoints are. I understand their rationale, and therefore they're not bad people. We can converse. It's funny you say about over the course of at a dinner. Braver Angels has a workshop that addresses, I forget exactly what it calls, something of civility at the Thanksgiving table or the Christmas, or holiday table. And it's all about people today. If I'm going to my Thanksgiving dinner and I know Uncle Charlie's going to come to the dinner, and I know he's a right-wing Republican and I happen to be a Democrat, I almost don't want to go to Thanksgiving dinner because I know if politics comes up, we're going to be in a fight. And and the dinner's not worth it. We're going to hate each other. And I'm going to think Uncle Charlie just doesn't understand what's going on in the world. So this workshop, and we do it before Thanksgiving, before the holidays, allows you to go into that kind of situation and converse in a civil way. For example, if Uncle Charlie says something that is, to me, totally absurd, rather than say, Uncle Charlie, you don't know where you're coming from. You don't know what the hell's going on. I would say, Uncle Charlie, help me to understand if this is so I'm not confronting Uncle Charlie. I'm talking to him, with him.
I think one of the most difficult pieces of this is not saying instantly in your head, this is a bad person.
Yeah.
Whether it doesn't matter who they follow, what they believe, but you have to believe in the good in people. And that's what I'm saying is the most difficult part, is to believe in the good nature of somebody despite their beliefs, and knowing that you can have your beliefs, I can have my beliefs. Let's not try to change each other's mind, because that's where we're going to come to blows. But we're going to try to understand that there's a problem that needs to be solved, and we need to work together on that.
Right. One of the things that one of several different formats that Braver Angels use, and again, free Zooms. I told you about the skills workshops, but we also do discussions on a subject, and we'll even do debates. So we will pick a very highly controversial subject, again, race relations, abortion, whatever. And people will come to that on Zoom and they're going, man, it's my chance to really sound off and point fingers at the other side. But our debates are not like a college debate where I have to win and I've got to beat you up. And if I win, then you lose. Our debates are everything has to go through the moderator, and it's positioned as a collective search for the truth.
Yeah.
So collectively, we'll all hear each other, and it's moderated very in a controlled basis. There's no swearing, there's no finger pointing, and we don't allow that. So after about an hour and a half, you've heard the other side and where they're coming from. And
So
that's the way we need to be in America today.
so because I feel like some people may get emotional or may start to raise their voice or may start to point fingers. How do you squelch that?
Yeah, I think you would do something like if somebody asked a question and it was a good question, but it was done with animosity and swearing or whatever. The moderator again would say, Joe, we can't let it get out of control here. Would you just state your question in a civil way so that the so-and-so can answer your question? You bring the tone down, you bring it back to, I want to hear the other side, what your response is.
Do you think it's healthy for the people that want to say, I don't want to hear the other side. I know what they're thinking. I don't need to hear it. Is that healthy or unhealthy?
I think that's in our country today, that's where we are. I think it's unhealthy. You look at Congress. They never get together, the two parties. They caucus. Every caucus they have in Congress is by one party or the other. So the Republicans always go off the Black caucus, the Green caucus, the Health caucus, whatever, only with the other side. The only one in Congress today is something called the Problem Solver Caucus, where you have 25 representatives who are Republican, 25 who are Democrats, and they get together and talk openly and solve problems together. They try to find common ground. That's the way all of Congress can work. Unfortunately, it's only a small group. So if you're going to say, I don't want to hear the other side, well, then we'll always be divided. And unfortunately, we'll become even more divided.
How do you make Braver Angel's message louder? I say that because we hear it a lot in the media, like TV, everywhere. We hear how divided we are. We hear their opinions. We hear, that sort of helps drive what we think, especially if we are particularly planted in one side or the other. But a message of togetherness, a message of listening, a message of education is probably a lot more difficult to blast out and get people involved in that, because you want to avoid conflict. You want to, shut down and be like, I know what they believe. I know what I believe. I don't need to listen to it. There is that unhealthiness. So how do you get that message of Braver Angels out a little bit louder than everybody else?
Well, we've actually we've been given some good press. I mean, we've been on Fox and MSNBC. We've had articles in USA Today. So we're getting the word out that way. We're doing workshops and debates, and they're all free and they're online, and we're attracting exposure that way. Because I think when most people hear what we're all about, people say, that makes sense. We know in this country today that all the surveys show, most people think we're just going in the wrong direction. If you look at all the polls, people want unity. They're fed up with what they see in Congress. They're fed up of turning on the television and hearing only one side or the other, or the newspaper is either a conservative or a liberal. So I think most of Americans today want to get back to moderation, to unity, to talking with the other side. It's how do you do that? Personally, this is just Al Smith talking. I think we need a movement in this country, almost something like the civil rights movement, where we get everybody who rises up, voters, to say enough is enough. Let's get back to where we were with civility and a lack of division and become Americans with our own views, but that's how our country will survive. It's not easy to do. I mean, look at the media. Within Braver Angels, we'll admit, we're not sure yet how we change that. The media makes a lot of money basically being all one side or the other. That's their, that's their financial
stability, their
mantra.
livelihood.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you get an MSNBC or a Fox to the other side a fair shake? That's a tough one. We haven't figured that out.
Yeah, I agree. It's an incredibly tough decision to be in. And we've talked about it a bit here on the Scuttlebutt, though at VBC we don't talk politics. We've talked about that division, and we've talked about how veterans are, as you said, uniquely positioned to be able to bring people together. And I think part of like VBC's mission here in hearing stories, we want to create communities of listening. That's part of our mission. Now it's more specifically centered on veterans. We want to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories. But I like the idea of our mission also being sort of like in line with what Braver Angels is, the idea of creating community, of listening to each other, bringing people together to hear each other's stories, to ask questions, to be curious. And I think curiosity is part of this, it's part of that education. You can't know what this other person's beliefs are and shut down. You can be curious and ask questions about it, but it's also on the other side to say that if this person is curious, to not try to change them to what you believe. You could just talk to them about what your beliefs are, why they are. Just like I think at the beginning of our conversation, you started off, you went to college, you got drafted, you said, my country's calling me and I'm going to do this, and anti-war protesters might come out and, like you said, they aligned that soldier with the war and they hated the soldiers. But you sat there in front of that group of 25 people and said, okay, I'm not going to get angry because that's only going to rile this up. And I'm going to listen. And I'm just going to, ease the tension. And that was, I mean, that was extremely mature for where you were at age-wise, which is kind of astounding.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go back to that situation, but hopefully I handled it right. Here's why, Sean, just why I think veterans are such a critical group to advance what Braver Angels is trying to do and what the country, I think, wants to see happen. Give you an example. I get together with a group of Vietnam veterans, mostly Vietnam veterans, but we're very inclusive to, Afghan vets or whatever. We get together in New York City for a luncheon, probably 3 times a year. And we've been doing this. This started 30 years ago by 2 Vietnam vets who went out to lunch. But we continue to get together. We love to see each other. You can walk in the room. You can feel the camaraderie, whatever. You feel at home. Now, I know some of these vets are extreme liberals. Others are extreme conservative. I happen to think that I lean right, although there are 2 issues that I agree with liberals. But when we converse and we have a good time and we talk about some serious issues, if somebody comes across and says something in a liberal vein, that's okay. You're a veteran, I'm a veteran first, we're Americans. So I that's okay. I'm not going to call you a bad person. Of course I'm not. You're a vet, I'm a vet. And it's that kind of group mentality we need in America. Again, Americans first. Have your opinion, whatever. And so we've never had an argument on anything political in this Vietnam Veterans Group because we know where we're coming from. We know what's more important. That's what has to spread throughout the country.
So how do we create that group mentality? If you have that sort of, you're a veteran, I'm a veteran, and that's sort of like how you initially connect. It's I think as a civilian myself, it's harder for me to go back to the idea of like, I'm an American, you're an American. How do we educate, or how do we start to help people to see that commonality to start? that baseline that you're human, I'm human, but even higher than that, you're American, I'm American, you know we're both civilians, we both could be from very different ideological backgrounds, very different, everything, but you have to really educate on that, instill that baseline of we're both Americans.
We can instill that if you go to a Brave Angels Zoom, whether it be a debate or a skills workshop, whatever, you will see it how we do it, and we do it very successfully. And people always leave feeling like always. I'm sure there's a few that came in with the wrong mentality and go leaving with the wrong mentality, whatever. But how do we spread that? We can't send everyone in America to a Brave Angel Zoom. We'd like to, but we know the base, the core of the country, like I said before, wants unity. We're trying to work it out. We've formed what we call a braver network, where we're trying to get together and partner with a lot of other organizations who have similar objectives to Braver Angels, democracy first, whatever, Fix USA, all know we're on a wrong course in this country. And we're partnering with them to get the word out to what Braver Angels wants to do, what they want to do. It's not going to be easy. If it was, it would have been done already. But we're a start. And I think the key thing is to get engaged. Every citizen should get engaged. And the more engaged we get in, and I do as a volunteer with veterans organizations and with Brave Rangers, the more engaged we are, the more I think we'll come back to the roots of what American democracy is all about.
It's a good message. And if you're watching here on YouTube, you'll see that I shared my screen. You can see there are QR codes that will lead you to the Braver Angels website. I will also have links in the description. If you're just listening on podcast, check your description. There are links there. You can check out Braver Angels, their history, their mission, who's a part of their board, the workshops that they have, everything. It's all there. And it's all, like you said, there are free Zooms that you can sign up for. And Al, where do you see this going? Where's the next step for Braver Angels?
We're evolving every day. We're looking at ways to spread the message. It's going to be somewhat of a slow process. But if we don't start doing it, we know we're on the wrong track in this country. I mean, we're just going the wrong way. We got to change it. And I wish I could tell you, here's the plan, and by this 2025, we will have changed everyone's mind. It's going to be a slow process. We're trying. I would just ask Sean, for any of the vets who are tuned into this, I would just ask them two questions. Are you comfortable with the division you are seeing in this country and the lack of civility? And if you're not, and I'm sure most aren't, if you could get involved and change that a little at a time, maybe big jumps at a time, would you want to do that? And if you do, that's where the military and veterans group of Braver Angels comes in. Join us. You are the perfect fit for what we want to do.
So I have my own personal question here to finish us off, because as we head into 2024 here, my thoughts on this year is going to be, oh boy, I really don't feel like living through 2024. What advice do you have for me, a civilian, getting through this year and for what is to come, but specifically more like this year seems like it's just not going to go very well?
It's not. It's going to be turbulent. I guess there'll be a lot of issues that will be talked about in the presidential campaign. We'll hear about it every night. come to a Braver Angels Zoom on any of these issues. We try to address them all. The Military and Veterans Group, matter of fact, has one coming up in February. I'm sorry to say I forget the exact date, but if you go on braverangels.org, you can see one. But we're going to tackle the Hamas Israeli issue. But we're going to do it not so much the Palestinians are all right, the Israelis are all right. We're going to try to look at it and understand it better and hopefully bring people together about that. So, I would just say tune in to the Braver Angels Zoom calls and get involved with the local alliance. And I think you will come out of it feeling better about where we're going and what we can do about it, and make the positive change we need in our country. Because again, veterans, the last thing we want to do, and many of us put our life on the line for this country, we don't want to see it fall apart. And I think, sadly, we're starting to fall apart, to tear ourselves to pieces.
Well, here's hoping that we can find cooler minds and, find the good in each other. But Al, I want to thank you for sharing some of your story today and sharing your message from Braver Angels. I think it's a great message of unity and support and togetherness. And thank you for joining the Scuttlebutt podcast. Maybe we can touch base again early next year, and we could say, yeah, maybe there is some togetherness that we can find here.
Great. Listen, thank you for the opportunity to share some of the things I said about Vietnam. I'm sure any Vietnam vets can relate to some of the stories and whatever, but thank you for exposing more people to what Braver Angels is about. It's what our democracy should be about.
Thank you. And to our listeners, please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. And you can always reach out to me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org with any ideas, thoughts, comments, or questions. Thank you again, Al, and look to see you again on a future episode of The Scuttlebutt.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. Tobacco-Free Adagio Health has been supporting the podcast for quite some time now. We've been so pleased to be supported by them. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health, so they want people to quit. They have classes, nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about what Tobacco-Free Adagio Health offers at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org, or you can check out the 2 Scuttlebutt episodes that featured Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. We had a wonderful representative come on to the podcast, talk to us about all the classes and therapies that they offer. It was 2 wonderful conversations, so I definitely direct you to both of those if you want more information, or just call their free quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. Thank you again, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health, for your support.